Thanks very much to Colin and for all of you for giving us an hour of your time. We're going to try and make this, we sort of tried to put together a talk that covers off basically a broad high-level BBC in the north of England related to the Future Media group division that we're in. Keith's going to dive in and give you the sort of real nitty-gritty of what it's like to deliver the services that the BBC's rolling out on the internet, and then I'm going to sort of go back and do a little bit of visioning piece from BBC R&D with a few of our projects that we're doing based in Media City. I'm going to try and get it so that it'll end up with questions at the end. You know, if we say something completely provocational and insulting to people, we will delete the video, but we'll try and talk as openly and honestly as possible. There's no point in doing these things if we do the pat speech. So I'm going to try and just show you something that links why we do the job we do.
The station goes on the air. Makes you wonder.
So that's the trailer that says, why do we have engineers in the BBC? The very first employee in the BBC was an engineer. It wasn't the front of house talent, and it's a sort of quite a remarkable thing that gets lost in the mix, that all of those things predominantly came from the BBC working with the industry to go forward. It's about reminding people who, when they get their licence fee, that you're not just paying for the great content, which is what we in the services, but behind the services are teams that Keith leads and I lead, trying to make sure that it stays relevant and it stays appropriate to the way in which the audiences are moving. We're based at the shiny Media City down in Salford. Hopefully some, if not all of you, have had a chance to go down there. There are around 2,500 BBC people. There's now the whole of the ITV production crews moved out of Manchester, Coronation Street and the like. There's a range of small companies and studios. We had will.i.am and The Voice doing all their blind auditions back in there a few months ago. It was set up just under 3 years ago, and for us as a division, there's the largest component is Future Media, which is about 450 people who are focused on the online services. So quickly, briefly, how we organise ourselves, what they call the 10 products. The one service is the BBC Online, and the 4 screens is a moot point, but mobile, tablet, desktop and connected television have become increasingly prevalent as a way in which people have moved from simply firing up their desktop. And so there's the classics of news and sport and weather and the children's, but also all of the TV, iPlayer and radio content, as well as search and discovery. So based out of Salford are the 2 divisions related to children's content, CBeebies and CBBC. If you have kids under the age of 10, you probably know most of these things. If you have under the age of 4, these things are the bane of your life. 10, they're just slightly scary. But the teams that produce all the content, but also all of the interactive content and the services relevant to those age groups. Recently, we were just talking this before we started, what they call the knowledge and learning product, which is predominantly things like specialist factual history, natural history, science, has just launched a whole new way of thinking about producing online supporting content. So these called the I Wonder Guides, rich in info visualizations, and there's a lot of them around the World War I. And we're saying, like, on the first day when it was announced on one show, 400,000 people went and started using these guides. So the sort of scale of even relatively low niche things potentially suddenly turn into large-scale numbers. All of the television, ITV, interactive television, mobile and tablet versions of the iPlayer, of which I'd hate to guess how many there are, but I've heard numbers of like 650 different variants of Android, iOS, Windows, Xboxes, PlayStations. They're all built by an engineering team based at Salford, and the design as well. This is what we're calling Connected Red Button, which is rolled out on TiVo and is now rolling out on YouView and Sky, which is the sort of refresh of what the Press Red used to be back on old digital TVs. So bringing extra content, extra context to the main programs that you're watching. You know, and again, all the user experience, all the accessibility on all of these things is coming from, you know, a BBC that didn't exist 2.5 years ago in Salford. The other thing that's worth noting, and I'll come back to this again at the end of the questions, but Since 2012, I've been running something called Connected Studio, which is our ambition to bring in new ideas from outside the BBC. So it's predominantly been looking at indies and freelancers and getting new ideas of what the BBC's future services could be. Increasingly, we've been seeing academic groups. So we recently ran an event with BBC News looking at the future of news journalism and storylines, and we had teams. I think we had some colleagues from Lancaster, but we also had people from Newcastle, Swansea, and increasingly we're trying to support academic engagement in this. One, it's brilliant for young talent to come and play with some real proper data services. So the news one, for example, we had not just the metadata from BBC News, but also from Trinity Mirror, from The Guardian, from The Times, from The Telegraph. So it was very much, we're bringing a lot of the UK's sort of data architects, data ideas together. We're going to be doing more of these across the country, and I'd encourage, if you've got any students who are interested, to get them to come along. You can join any team, you can meet indies and things like that. This is now going to run for the next 3 years, and broadly we aim to spend about £1 million externally supporting ideas through, and we've got stuff now going into commission with children's, and some of the stuff is making its way into sport as well. So I think it's just a really good way in which we're trying to make sure the BBC can't do solve all the problems itself, so being a bit more open. So I'm going to leave that as an overview of the BBC. I'm going to let Keith now dive in if you want to grab your...
So I'm just going to talk about sport. So I work in sport, and my name's Keith. Just very quickly, just so you know who this bloke is in the nice jumper stood before you today. It's my best jumper, by the way. So I've been at the BBC about 3 years now. Before that, I was at Lancaster for a long, long time. So I first came here nearly 20 years ago, which is quite scary to say that. So undergraduate, PhD student, and researcher, and worked with a bunch of people in this room. And then left late 2011 to work on Olympic stuff on mobile, then joined sport, which was mobile related, and then the last 6 months engineering manager for sport, and that's what I'm going to talk about particularly today. So the first thing is kind of explaining what my crappy job title means. So engineering manager really means I've got two responsibilities, is scaling the engineering team itself, so the people and how we build stuff, and then actually architecting and scaling the systems that you use as the audience. So we have a program called Engineering Excellence. That's really about taking, I guess, a single developer and making them part of a team, and making that team highly effective, highly performant, and delivering value to the audience really, really quickly. So it's all right having a really smart individual, but we want all our individuals to work as part of a collaborative team, and that's a different thing. Secondly, as a developer, how do you get your code from your laptop that you work on your own and get it to the live platform as soon as possible? So what's the process and pipeline involved in that? So we have lots of different environments, integration, test, staging before we get to live. So there's a whole lot of stuff around how we do testing, and I'll come on to some of this a bit later. And then the last bit is, as I've said, talking about how do we make new stuff and how do we make it work for the big numbers that I'll show you briefly in a second. So I'm just going to tell you a really short story, and we're halfway through it, so there is no end yet, so I'm sorry. All stories have a beginning, middle and end, and I don't know what the end's going to be right now, but we're just going to jump back to the Olympics. So I've got a short video, and then I'll jump back in after that. That's it for the jazzy material, I'm afraid. So the point of that is really, Olympics was a massive thing for the organisation and for Future Media, and the audience loved it, and we can tell they loved it because they told us so. So you know you've done a good thing when people can take a poo and do something at the same time. That's the future. So the audience loved it, and that's fantastic. So we offered lots of content, video, data, content about athletes and countries on every single device. And then what was weird was the next day, after the closing ceremony, most of the team were down in London for this, watching it in super high vis, which was cool. So it's kind of like, well, where do we go from here? We've just set the really high bar. We've just given the world everything we could possibly do on any platform. So what do we do next? And I think with the Olympics it was hundreds of people around the organisation, 3-year project, 4-year project. I mean, it was a main focus for a lot of people. Off the back of that, we're now little old sport, kind of 65 people, and we still presumably need to deliver that kind of ambition with nowhere near the same resources. So a much, much smaller team. So how do we meet that? And if you've been watching the Winter Games, you'll see you're still getting the same content on different devices and different platforms. And I'm going to cover that a little bit. So how do we build on that and keep innovating, but much smaller team. So our basic goals, there was lots of them, but I'll condense it down. So sport is really about live, and the BBC is about live events. We bring people together on different platforms to experience live events, whether it's like an election, a music event like Glastonbury, or obviously sport, which is our thing. Speed is important, so we want to make sure we get the content to you as soon as possible. Across devices is a given, so Adrian mentioned the 110.4 thing already, and the 4 devices is really thousands of devices, but never mind that. And scalable, so it has to work across all platforms, has to scale to huge numbers, and I'll show you some numbers in a second, and ideally reusable, so we don't want to keep making something for a particular event and then throwing it away. We need to try and kind of build on that. So those are the main things. So let's see where we got to so far. We're about halfway through our journey, so let's have a little look at this. So you could look at that and say, well, what have you been doing for 2 years? You just made it a bit more blue, right? It's kind of the same. So all the streams, all the content. What we've actually done is re-engineer a whole load of stuff, and what you see there is about halfway through what you expected to see before the Rio Games in a couple of years. So we're kind of on a journey to the next Rio Games, and this is roughly where we are. And what's significant is that we have made a thing which we kind of call something that supports live events. And although it kind of looks a bit like the Olympics, so you can see content and data and video, it's actually one application, whereas the Olympics, there's actually lots of different applications by lots of different teams all around the organisation. So when you're looking at one page, there's actually lots of different apps, whereas this is one app that we control and manage. And I'll just quickly demo it, just in case you've not watched any of the Olympics. So Winter Games, where's my screen gone? There we go. So the Winter Games, now I've lost my cursor. Where is it? Here we go. So we've done some, everything we do now is responsive, so it works across all devices. During the main Olympics, we had a desktop site and a mobile site, and that kind of made no sense, having 2 products. So this is one thing that works across all devices. And if I do the classic drag in your corner of the screen kind of thing, which I can't do because it's resized badly, you can see it reflows. We've also made a tool actually to help show this, demonstrate a bit better. So we've got a little tool where we can see this is what our content's going to look like at, say, desktop size. And you can see it's adapting to different screen widths and devices in a tiny device. So this is just to emphasize it's just one thing. We've made it once and it works across all the platforms. And then the live aspect is here. And again, this reflows and adjusts its size and dimensions. And the point here is that we've got video on this page, so we can start watching curling, which is the world's most popular sport right now. We get live text updates about what's going on today. We can see what the medals table is, so we've got data in here. You can connect to other live streams, so there's more than one live stream going on at the moment, so that's there as well. We can find out what's going on across the organisation, and you can get catch-up, so you can get what's on now, what's coming up in the future, what you've missed, all the data, and it's all in one single place. So while it is the same as the Olympics, it's actually quite interesting because it's now one application, whereas before it was multiple different applications. So we kind of took a gamble, and not started again, but we kind of took what we learned, and we kind of knew that mobile was going to be a big thing, and tablets. So during the Olympic Games, for example, in London, which is just over 18 months ago, I think about a third of the audience were on mobile. Tablets didn't really exist that much at that time. These are the stats from the first Saturday for the Winter Games in Sochi. So we had 10.1 global unique users, 7.3 from the UK, and then from that, almost half from mobile, and then another little chunk on tablet. So now mobile and tablet together takes up 2/3 of the audience. So it's gone from nearly a third to 2/3. And we knew it was going to come, but it's kind of just, it's really arrived now. So building once and building for every device and every platform can only be done in a responsive way. We don't know what devices are out there. We've got a good idea. I think it's more like several thousand that hit the platform every day. And Google Glass might come around, but the idea is that it doesn't matter what people buy in the shops, we can change. And obviously connected Red Button and Red Button TV is still big. People still like to watch TV on a TV actually as well. So just really quickly, I talked about 5 things. Live events, we kind of covered off, so we're supporting a live event right now with Sochi. We covered all devices, and the next kind of main things are around the other 3 things that are not scribbled out. So we've done lots of work to get the data fast. So when things happen, whether it's a goal going in on a Saturday afternoon or it's a medal being won, we want that data straight away. You would expect to watch something on TV, then if you picked it up on your device, you'd expect to see the same information. So fast data is really, really important to us. Rendering is really important, so performance of the device itself. So our pages are quite rich, as you saw. They look very nice, but that can increase page weight and make it feel quite slow. So we do a lot of work around called time to glass, or the first and time to first byte and all that kind of stuff. So performance is a massively serious thing for us. And then process. So it's okay making shiny things for the audience, but we really want to make the process of getting it there less painful for developers. So an engineering team of about 35 people, they're quite smart. In fact, they're very smart. And we want them making things, not faffing around all the time. So there's a lot of stuff around making, getting stuff out to the audience really quick. So just touching on speed and performance and testing. This is just some of the devices we've got in our drawer that our manual testers use. I actually took this photo, and you would not believe how long it takes to get loads of phones charged all on the same page without the backlight going off so you can take a damn picture. It took me absolutely ages. That's the faff, so I should have just hired someone to do it for me. We have lots of devices. That's not the device landscape. It looks more like this. There's just a bajillion phones, devices, and more get released every second of every day. We don't know how big they are. We don't know how performant they are in terms of processor, CPU, and all that kind of stuff, and memory. And then if you just take one device, what you have is the fact that they can have shed loads of browsers. So every device has a stock browser, but you can also install, particularly on Android, lots of other different browsers. So even though you've got one device with certain capability, the browser on that device really affects what it's actually capable of. So what support is for JavaScript, for example. And then just to make the world even more grim, because we have an app, so a native app that you can download, as well as offering stuff on the web content, you have actually issues and differences between a web view in an app, which is what we have. So all our content is a web view, so it's just WebKit or Safari inside an app. And you would think that Safari in an app would work as the same as Safari not in an app, but it doesn't. So you've kind of just multiplied the game like a gajillion times, right? So it's completely impossible to do this stuff. So we do a lot of stuff around testing. So we test, I'd say, almost everything. Like we test as much as we can. A lot of it in an automated magic fashion. And then we have tools like the viewporter thing that I've just showed you, where our manual testers can get a sense of what that would look like. They don't have to get 4 devices out. They can just use the tool and resize the window. And we do crazy things like taking screenshots of our systems on test and on live, and we make sure that nothing that we're about to release to live is going to break it. So what this is doing here, it's comparing these images, and it highlights in blue differences. So you can see it's actually just the content that's changed. The page itself is so we have to invest in tooling. So a team of 35 people delivering the same kind of stuff we did when we had 400 people, we have to invest in smart stuff. Here's half the team. I think it's about half the team. There's about 65 people in sport at the moment. So another area is actually how you scale up that team. How do you make them work collaboratively much more fluidly? So we do a lot of stuff on process. And I'm sure you can kind of figure out that in order to make a feature or a thing that we release to the audience, it requires so many meetings and discussions, it's insane. But there's obviously a lot of people involved. So to make any kind of feature, you've got the specification itself, the priorities of the business and different people involved in it, and then the kind of stakeholders, which are the 4 pieces of the pie there. So UX&D is user experience and design. So they're designers, the creative people. The editorial team, so they're the journalists that tell the story, particularly in sport. They're telling you the story of the day. The product owners, and then our lot in terms of the geeks. So we have to all get together and figure that out, and that's quite a challenge. So one of the things we've changed, which seems really simple and really obvious, is we drink beer. So that's not true. So we've got a process called the 3 Amigos, and the 3 Amigos is really having product and development and test just talk about things all the time, really frequently. And there's different phases to this where you call pre-amigo, 3 amigo, and agree amigo. We like names for things. So the idea is you break things down in small chunks and you talk about it little and often, and eventually you get to the thing you want to describe. And the way we do that is through something called Gherkin, which is just plain English. So you can see there, this is a feature that it's called the Athletes Index feature. So it's like, as an Olympics fan, I want to see a list of athletes on a page. That's simply what it means. But you can see it's in plain English. You don't need to be a PhD grad to read that. So that means that developers can talk to testers, can talk to product owners and business owners in a really simple way. There's no magic. So if you say, I want a page which got athletes on it, and we write it in plain English, everyone knows what that thing is. And the cool thing with that is that we can use that to drive our testing. So our automated tests run from this. So this generates our automated testing framework. So changes in plain English will stimulate changes in the tests. So that means we can make a thing and we can test a thing we've made, all driven from plain English, which is, and this has saved thousands of hours, and it's really, really productive. Last two things. One is on infrastructure's got to scale. So every time a developer commits code, it kind of goes into a CI environment, continuous integration, and we're moving that slowly but surely to more continuous delivery. So small commits can get pushed out to the audience really, really quickly. So Sport release quite often, probably more often than other teams, but still, you know, if someone's working away in the morning, that should be in front of mum and dad in the afternoon potentially. There's no reason why not. So we're trying to reduce that time, reduce that cycle time right down a lot. So reusable was the last thing on the list, and hopefully you can see how this page might look during Wimbledon. Take away bloke on ice and stick in a tennis thing. Hopefully you can see how it might look on the World Cup, and maybe you could figure out how it might work for Glastonbury, so a different event. So a lot of the work we're doing is actually supporting other things, not just specific events. So it's really not a single thing. It's more reusable across the business and across sport at the moment. So we're done. We're finished. We're halfway through. We're nearly at Rio, and we could probably just stop. But the fact of the matter is, when you've got live events and we have huge numbers coming to us, what we really want to start thinking about is how we look at personalisation and making you feel like you're actually events. So how do you make it more engaged? It's all right getting a live stream, getting live data, but how do we make it more compelling? How do we bring the audience in much more? Yeah, there's tons of stuff around that we could talk about afterwards.
So hopefully that was sort of stuff that you don't normally hear about. It's the sort of, you know, the scalability. I'm now trying to touch. This room's quite warm, isn't it? It's quite a little hotter than I was expecting this morning. Shouldn't have worn a suit. Trying to impress you guys. I'm going to sort of talk as a quite high level. Hopefully I'll show a few films and stuff, just about where BBC R&D is seeing. So if you imagine we work alongside the colleagues who are building the now, trying to envisage and make some good guesses with limited resources of where the world's heading. So we have this sort of phrase of better than being there better. It sort of plays on the personalisation and the live aspects, which are some of the unique things that the BBC brings to the party. I'm going to try and show you, I'm a bit wary on the audio, a video that I think sets the scene of why I wanted to work in the department I work. Let me see if this... So, Captain P.P. Eckersley, not just Mr. P.P. Eckersley, was the very first chief engineer of the BBC, and he actually wrote that in 1924 as a statement of intent about why you have R&D in the media industry. The fact that it's taken us nearly 100 years to do some of it is sort of quite startling, but it does show you that there's always, you know, some of these things feel like they can have happened yesterday and they sometimes take around. So from an R&D perspective, we treat broadcasting and media as a very simple set of constructs. So it's the ability to create media, it's the ability to deliver it, and it's the ability to consume. All three of those very bland statements simply explode once you think about user feedback, user-generated content, all the different mechanisms for delivery. But at the moment, our vision around the next period, and we do very much applied research, not fundamental research, which is why we work with university partners on the further out challenges, is sort of basically simplifying some of our big bets that we think the media industry is moving towards. So one is predominantly the impact of IP, the internet, within the entire chain. So not just the idea of you picking up via your desktop or your Wi-Fi, but actually at the point of creation of media in studios and in OBs, the the work that we've been doing, and I know Nick is leading some work here that's related around actually plugging cameras straight into networks and into servers and arrays. We think, and Keith touched on it, is already being used, but a more data-centric approach to how you think about content. So at the moment, if you think about iPlayer, effectively we give you a completed file, the whole thing. It's got the sound, it's got the picture, it's got any of the overlays, and that's a file of data. But actually, increasingly, you're going to see that broken down into smaller and smaller chunks. And we're grappling with the challenges for the BBC, but also for the user on a multitude of new devices, new interfaces, which on the cycle, the pictures that Keith showed. What that means in way in which we frame the work we do, and we're about 130 researchers, there's probably about another 30 management, and then we have a whole range of interns and PhDs and seconded staff. But broadly, we're thinking the world's moving to a more immersion, the desire to be there, and certainly to be there better, pervasive, to be present on as many relevant devices whenever the user needs, data rich, both in the sense that the data is meaningful, not just a splurge of data, but that data is relevant to you and your family, if you're in the family, and increasingly that will adapt to who you are and become more and more interactive, and not just the idea of making games in that sense. So I'm going to take you through a few sample projects. Nearly every project that we do is written up online on our blog, and there are various films and stuff. So immersion being better than being there. 2012, we worked with NHK from Japan on super high vision, which is sort of shorthand is 8K, so 8 times what we're capable of delivering as HD. We ran 3 sites across UK, Bradford, Glasgow and London. The 2020 Olympics is going to be in Tokyo, if I can remember correctly, and Japan as an entire nation have committed to do 8K broadcasts of the entire Olympics. So we were doing a couple of limited events, swimming, the opening and things. It's notionally beyond realism. It hurts your eyes if you watch it for too long. Whether that's true or not, our tests didn't suggest that was the case, but you can, it's good marketing bump if nothing else. In between then, the manufacturers don't want to wait to 2020, so you will be increasingly seeing 4K used or high vision as used as ultravision used as a way in which we describe increased desire for higher realism in pictures. With that comes an attendant set of challenges in distribution, the device is capable of rendering that, and actually whether the user experience warrants it. So sport feels like 4K will be piloted at the World Cup, but can you really imagine watching Casualty in 4K or I don't even watch them, but I can imagine that you don't need to be in 4K to watch those sorts of things. But the challenge is the industry is responding to the desire to be there if you can't be there. Other ways in which immersion is being challenged is this is an experiment we've been doing with the Philharmonic and is one of our European Union projects, looking at games technologies like the Oculus Rift, which is a new Kickstarter invested head-mounted display, looking at binaural and 3D sound, and increasingly how you capture video in 3D. So we're privileged, we've got a works band who are called the BBC Philharmonic, who work in the studio block between Keith's offices. And this is one of our sort of new recruits using the Oculus Rift. The eye bulbs are patent pending from us, but if you can make sense of the stereoscopic vision view at the bottom, she's also wearing headphones which are doing a binaural representation of the audio. So okay, I don't think she needs to particularly say anything, but the idea is what would it feel like to place yourself in the middle of the orchestra? How would it sound? So the sounds that she's picking up, stereo renders to the center of your head, binaural renders you around you, so it gives you a different sense of immersion. And we're trying to work out whether it's feasible to shift a lot of our classical recording into that approach, and we've got some working applications on Android devices. So you got mobile phone, you want to listen, you want to be there. What does that mean? The pervasive element of it, I'm not really going to touch into, but this challenge to make it all of those content elements relevant wherever they are on every device, and with the same principles of simple use, usability, accessibility, become more and more challenging. And Keith's given a far better description, but the idea that the user can come to a new experience, be it Strictly or Glastonbury or Grand Prix or the elections, and feel comfortable and immediate of getting to what they want, which is to be part of the experience. And the Wimbledon one we showed, I don't think it quite looked like that this year, but from an R&D perspective, that's what we believe the world's moving to. So dynamic data, social, rich video on the devices. The data-rich aspect, so hopefully this is going to start running. There should be no audio. So this is, again, I was talking briefly to Nigel, we're doing real-time object tracking. The names aren't correct because the engineer doesn't like football, so they are my colleagues' names appearing, and the ball is a ball, so at least they got that one right. But this is doing real-time object identification. So if data is to become, it has value to the user and has value to the experience, this is previously would be production tool, running offline, capable of giving you those sort of gnarly bits of story that the journalists talk around at halftime, or the pundits or whatever they're called. What we wanted to illustrate, and we're rolling this out, we're going to do some experiments at the Commonwealth Games, is that you can suit Burton's. There's humour in engineers. I never realised this. I haven't seen it all the way through though. But the idea that you're applying computer vision techniques, which are relatively well known, but doing it in real time and thinking about how that's presented back. So we do, my group, which is more focused on human-computer interaction, doing a lot about data overlays and where you place data to be most appropriate, which I think I'm going to come to in a second. Other ways in which the data-rich, pervasive, this is just a fantastic experiment going on at the moment. Very semantic web driven about data descriptions. So we digitized the entire World Service radio archive. It's about 40 or 60 years worth of content. Obviously it doesn't have much metadata in that it probably said the date, if anything. And we're doing a crowdsourcing experiment running for 18 months, looking at how communities of people can get online and take transcripts, which are partially completed, speech to text, and add more value to the metadata, and how does that then surface up? It shows that the world is not just about now and live, it's about retrieving things that have gone through our past and helping and using machines to make more meaning from it. And I really encourage you to sign up. It's working with, I was going to say the Wikimedia group, I think. And we did a day in London recently where it was a come along, all with headphones and transcribe together. I'm not quite sure why, but it worked. And finally, stuff around the idea of what it means in the front room. And one of your colleagues, Paul Coulton, is currently living with us for 3 months, working on some of the more experimental far-end research of this. But these are 2 experiments that, from my group, that are, I think, increasingly going to be interesting. And I think Kevin might know one of them. But we produced we have an ambition that you could make media respond to the user and do that in a dynamic way. And as the very first instance is this breaking out, you can go and try it. And it's an audio drama written with BBC Radio 4 drama writers. It's a radio drama, so there's no real pictures, but it uses settings in Chrome, it uses time of day, weather, and your location, and it adapts the content relatively subtly. So somebody in London doesn't know that they've listened to something different because most drama is made in London. But if you live in Grimsby, it starts referring to places within about a mile of you in Grimsby. You get a spike of, oh, did that just say whatever it is down the road? And it talks about the rain outside, and it puts a soundtrack about rain, which, to be honest, again, if you're making a drama now, it's all going to sound rainy. But this to me is really, really interesting because it's using context to change content, but doing it in a way that doesn't feel like a classic engineering experiment of like go left, go right. The photo on the right is a stylized art magazine photo of a hacked radio that has sensors in it. And to me, this is a really interesting increase in the Internet of Things and devices with sensors of, could you start recognizing who's in the room? Could you make interpretations of what they're doing in those rooms? Are there more than one person in the room? it's very much a provocation to people to think about that, and we encourage people to take that, and that's what Paul's doing, is effectively debunking most of our hypotheses at the moment, which is quite fruitful, lunchtime conversations. But that idea that devices are moving increasingly from just being beyond screen is quite powerful. Going back to the last bit that I think is really interesting in this personalising around is the BBC's had a richness of doing accessibility and inclusivity. Everybody pays a licence fee. Every household has the right to have the best services possible. One of the things that was identified, and we get lots of complaints at the BBC because everybody has a right, it sounds like your town halls, everyone has a right to say what they think should be better. And one of the biggest complaints has been around subtitles, and both subtitle quality in terms of timeliness and appropriateness, so getting things wrong. We do other work like that. And increasingly is a lot of reflections that with larger and larger screens, people are becoming more and more tired to watch intense dramas or documentaries where the text is at the bottom of the picture. So the and the reason that they were at the bottom of the picture was because it was a default setting in CFAX when CFAX was initiated 30 years ago. So we've been looking at, can you identify, using some of the classic image processing, can you identify places which would be more appropriate to position subtitles where the user will have less effort and so they will stay grounded in the story? So it doesn't make much sense, this single still, but I'd encourage you to look at some of the videos we've got on our website. The subtitles move around depending on where the focal point is of the drama, and it looks for dead space and places it there. And then we're using lab techniques and eye gaze tracking to try and work out what the optimum distance is, and you can track how much the user's eye moves from line to line. And again, that adapting around the needs and the devices will become more and more important. So I think that's sort of all I wanted to sort of give you an overview of how BBC R&D organises its work and thinks about its work. I think I've got time for questions, and then I've got one call to action for you guys that I need your help.